Hi there, welcome to this new YouTube channel that I've set up to look at Viking Age non-ferrous metalworking. But first, this is a video about a project I worked on last year on behalf of National Museum Scotland, making a replica of a brooch from the Galloway Hoard. This is the one you can see here. Now the first step in doing this was making an accurate 2x actual size drawing of the original. Using pictures sent to me by the museum, I drew out all the detail, getting the shape right, including the fact that the original isn't symmetrical. I drew this in pencil, going over it with ink, digitizing it, cleaning up the design. That gave me this drawing you can see here. Now the first step for making the silver piece was to cast an ingot. I did this the way that it would have been done in the 9th century when the original brooches were made, using a ceramic crucible and a soapstone mould, lined with wax to flux the metal as it's casting. That gives me this shiny ingot here. Now the next step is to hammer this out with a hammer and anvil. I evenly hammer both sides of the sheet. When I've gone over both sides, then I need to anneal it by heating it up to a red heat and quenching it. This stops stresses and fractures building up in the silver, stops it cracking. You can see the silver ingot getting bigger and bigger. Final stage is to smooth out the surface with a horn hammer which doesn't leave any marks on it. To transfer the design onto the silver, I reversed that digital image that you saw earlier, printed it onto tracing paper, and lifted the ink off the tracing paper with sellotape. This is a bit of a cheat, but I didn't want to have to draw it out all over again onto the silver. Then I'm using a sharp point to scratch the design onto the surface of the silver, ready for engraving. These are the gravers that I use. These are based on early medieval graving tools. These are pushed through the silver, digging out a little channel as it goes. You have to keep the pressure slow and steady on this. With the design fully transferred onto the silver, I then cut off the excess from the sheet. I didn't need all of that. I used shears for this and I'm going to put it aside for later. Then with the edges all filed to their nearly final shape, I set about working the design deeper. This process is called engraving, but it's really more like carving. Some of the designs are quite lightly etched into the surface, like the panels with the Truiddle style animals. Some of them are really quite deep. Parts of this design are open work. That is, they're pierced right the way through the sheet of silver. Now I did that by engraving or carving the design deeper and deeper into the silver. Then I used a piercing saw to take out the rest. 1,000 years ago, we know from records that this was probably done with a chisel. And that's how it looks like the originals were done from the Galloway Hoard. Now back to that piece of scrap silver. I'm turning that into a thinner sheet. I'm going to use this for the bosses. First I'll hammer it out like this, then punch out discs, then use a doming punch and a doming block to turn those into domes. I'll need rod for the shanks of the rivets. So here I'm turning this thinner piece of the silver into a rod. It's turned into a round piece using the swage on another anvil. And there are the finished rivets. Now I moulded all of the pieces of this brooch separately so that I could cast them and then assemble them later to give a silver version like this. This has had a modern Niello substitute applied to it and looks very, very much like the originals. This is part of the collection that I've made for Asgard of Galloway Hoard objects. This includes brooches, arm rings, and even the bird pin from the Galloway Hoard. I hope you've enjoyed watching that. Keep up with the channel and you'll see more from my project between the hammer and the anvil.